Newscast from the BBC.
It's Laura in the studio.
In glorious green.
Thanks.
If you're listening and not watching, it's glorious. I'm Paddy in the studio.
And Henry in the studio.
So, last 48 hours, there's lots and lots and lots of talk already about the history and the significance, and we've kind of gone on and on and on and on and on about that. What was interesting to me today was actually slap, bang, thank you, or maybe not thank you very much, ma'am. Big dilemma for this new government. For Jonathan Reynolds, the big new Business Secretary, has to decide what to do about the Tata Steel plant in Port Talbot in Wales, where there are 3,000 jobs around that number at risk because the company that owns it, Tata Steel, wants to close the blast furnace before they build another newer, greener one.
And this is one of the early, but there will be many of them, tough decisions for this new Labour government, which will get to the heart of what they're all about and what kind of economy they want and the ways in which they want to mobilise government or not mobilise government in order to secure it. I thought it was very interesting that Johnny Reynolds didn't just say that he had spoken to Tata Steel, but that Keir Starmer had made time to speak to them. Whether that will actually have an effect, let's see. But it shows that they know that this is a big sort of industrial question for this new Labour government. And that was also made clear by the presence of Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, on your panel, who is very eager for the government to find a way to guarantee the jobs of the workers at that plant.
And this is how Jonathan Reynolds explained or answered the question, what the hell are you going to do?
I've already spoken to Tata Steel about it, as has the new Prime Minister, made time for that conversation. I'll be talking to them again today. I'll be asking representatives of the workforce, Sharon and Unite, but also Community and GMB, to talk to me next week about that. It's not about underwriting loss-making businesses in perhaps a way we might have thought of industrial policy in the past. It is about being a partner for investment in the future. There is more money available for the steel industry under our plans for government. But that's about making sure we meet this transition with the private sector together and recognise, I think Sharon used the phrase, it is a good example of how we have to make sure that decarbonisation is not deindustrialisation, and we've got to do that together. But there is a better deal available for Port Talbot and the steel industry as a whole, I'm sure of that.
There's a better deal available.
Can I pull the focus out?
Yeah.
So the Conservative government was managing the transition from a big old belchy old furnace to an electric version, which
That's right.
And they were going to help with a possible multi-million pound deal. But, of course, in abeyance, all these questions about what happens to jobs during that transition period, it's one of the things on the in-tray of Labour. And we had the same Secretary of State on our programme. We asked him about Thames Water, because there was also a potential emergency nationalisation of Thames Water in his in-tray and the nationalisation of the railways. So if you go and take the Tata Steel as one example, I've just listed two more, to the Newscast, we say we're making a general point here about the list, which is a very rude word. It rhymes with hit and begins with S, and it's called let's call it the hit list.
That's right.
Which is the inbox of the new Labour government.
That's absolutely right. And these are massive, horrible problems to have to deal with, and also complicated, technical, legalistic. You've got, precedent, principle, practicality of people maybe losing their jobs or people having really unpleasant things floating in their water supply. These are really, really hard problems. And it's from the pictures of yesterday of that first cabinet meeting, when I have not seen a group of people look happier. I mean, they all looked like they were thinking, this is the best day of my life. To then suddenly the reversal of sitting in the chair and not saying, well, the Tories have failed on this and the Tories have failed on that, and suddenly going, wow, it's on me.
But this is
really
why, throughout the campaign, and indeed before, Keir Starmer has done that weird or sort of unusual thing, perhaps, for a leader of the opposition seeking, and in his case, accomplishing going into government, of playing down expectations. He's constantly said, yes, hope, but realistic hope, frank hope. And I think this is what he was talking about, these difficult choices. He said that politicians campaign in poetry and govern in prose. Keir Starmer campaigned in prose and is now governing in prose of necessity, because there are a lot of very difficult questions.
Can I just say, in a very juvenile way, we did talk about Frank Hope one Sunday, and I Googled to see if there was anybody called Frank Hope, and there's a tree surgeon in Peterborough called Frank Hope, and
Get him on.
I just had to share that. I couldn't help myself.
But you said you've been clear. I wanted to make the same, but I wanted to interrupt Henry to make the same point.
Did you look up Frank Hope, the tree surgeon in Peterborough as well?
No, I just wanted Frank Hope. I will add that I have read Tony Blair's column today in the papers, in which he said it like this, actually. He said, in the campaigning stage, you're the great persuader.
Yeah.
In the government phase, you're the great chief executive. That was the way he put it. And of course, he left office after 9 million years saying he wished he was bolder. And he's now being advised by Tony Blair, we know. So it's going to be...
But unlike Tony Blair, who became Prime Minister, having never held any office other than MP, various shadow posts, and having been a self-employed barrister, as all barristers are, Keir Starmer has been essentially a chief executive. He ran the Crown Prosecution Service. And we will learn, I think, fairly fast whether that actually fairly unusual background for a Prime Minister does make him more capable of instantly making that transition from persuader into administrator.
And I think it's interesting as well. I've seen a lot of critique of the journalistic class that we were too focused on politics and not focused enough on policy. And now comes the time, as you've expertly revealed on BBC One this morning, to say, OK, now energy policy meets reality in Tata Steel.
Right, so Tata Steel is such an interesting case study of this because, you know, Rachel Reeves has said again and again and again and again and again, we're not going to do crazy things with your money. We're not going to spend very much money. We're not going to write cheques. It was absolutely the opposite of a chequebook election. But when if Jonathan Reynolds goes to her and says, can I have a big cheque, please? Because if we let 3,000 jobs go in our first 100 days, that is going to be a capital P political disaster. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? And it will be absolutely fascinating to see, of course, most importantly for the people whose livelihoods depend on what they do, above all else. But are they going to find themselves in a position where they make a strategic decision because they can say, actually, we are going to give them money. There's £2.5 billion earmarked in the Labour manifesto for the steel industry. So they've got some money there. But I think what he was hinting at this morning on this particular thing was that they are going to grant some cash, but only if Tata guarantees some of the jobs, but whether the company accepts that or not.
But there's another question here, which isn't just about money. This is kind of an example of an instance, and there are various examples of these, where Labour have been able to say in opposition, well, look, we will sit at the table and we will get a better deal.
And it'll be partnership.
We will do something that the government hasn't been able to do. And so Wes Streeting, his first thing as Health Secretary was to call up the BMA and say he wants talks to begin next week. There's other examples. So now it's on them. Will they be able to secure something at that table that the government has not been able to secure, or in some cases the government hasn't even got to the table with? Let's see.
Let's talk about the table. Because, of course, one of the tables he's going to be sitting around is with the regional mayors.
Yes.
And he made a big pitch. I mean, we forget, in a way, we're being a bit noodly. Within hours, we've got this new government, and we're talking in terms we're sort of almost forgetting that's happened. But such is the pace of the coverage since then that we are now able to say he's off to Scotland today. He's doing the 4 home nations, and he wants to come back to England after he's been to Northern Ireland and Wales to meet the regional mayors of England. And you had one on the television.
Yeah, Andy Burnham, who, you know, obviously has been a Labour cabinet minister himself a long time ago, who is obviously cock-a-hoop that Labour has won the election. I mean, no question about that. However, you know, reality immediately bites. So he was saying very supportive things about Keir Starmer, as you would expect this morning. But he was straight off the bat, I want the money for the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. Thank you very much. I'll be really clear about that. They've got to invest in that cash. Straight off the bat saying, actually, I really want him to make it very clear that the 2-child benefit cap is under review and remains under review. And that's not just something that has been parked forever and dropped forever. And the thing I was most intrigued about that Andy Burnham said, he said, we have to show there is a, quote, decisive break with austerity. Now, that's not you can have like $1 billion here for dentists and $1 billion there for waiting lists. A decisive break from austerity. Oh, and by the way, let's build council houses, lots of council houses, which is not Labour policy. So they're not going to be short of what we would pompously call critical friends, or actually, as Sharon Graham, the union leader, said, a pain in the proverbial.
And Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer have had a difficult relationship over the years. Keir Starmer I remember one speech at a Christmas drinks for journalists, which was fairly quickly reported, where he just remorselessly took the mickey out of Andy Burnham. I think Sue Gray, his new chief of staff, has really improved that. Well, not that new, but has really improved that relationship. But the dynamic between the Prime Minister and these Metro mayors is very different to what we've ever seen since all these Metro mayors were created under Cameron Osborne, because Cameron Osborne unleashed this wave of devolution and knowingly, in the process, created a wave of local Labour power brokers. Keir Starmer made a play in his press conference about the fact that he was going to invite all the Metro mayors, not just the Labour ones. Well, all but one of them are Labour. Ben Houchen, the Conservative mayor of Tees Valley, is the only one who's not Labour. So, yes, they have their own particular interests. And yes, in many ways, they will prove a thorn to Keir Starmer, but they are bound by party allegiance in a way that's never been true of Conservative Prime Ministers dealing with these Metro mayors. You also have a Labour First Minister of Wales, Vaughan Gething, dealing with a Labour Prime Minister. That's a dynamic we haven't seen for 14 years. And looking at the general election results in Scotland, it seems quite plausible that within a couple of years, you'll have a Labour First Minister of Scotland dealing with a Labour Prime Minister.
And even if you don't in 2026, that dynamic, whereas for a long time, Westminster leaders have been a bit sort of nervous about how do you handle the SNP, because the SNP have seemed like they're the dominant political force. They have been absolutely busted in this general election. So when Keir Starmer goes to go and meet John Swinney, the First Minister, I'm sure they'll have a very cordial chat, but the power imbalance is going to be massive. And there's certainly occasions before when I've seen, a kind of Prime Minister go to see Nicola Sturgeon and you're actually sort of thinking, who's really in charge here? Just the dynamic. Clearly, a UK Prime Minister is somebody always with more political power than a First Minister in one of the devolved administrations. But the political kind of dynamic, like who's the winner? When we see the images of Starmer and Swinney later, everyone's going to know who the winner is and the person with momentum is, and it's not Mr. Swinney.
I mean, we even heard that the team around Boris Johnson was afraid of Nicola
Oh, they
Sturgeon.
were. Oh, yeah, they were. Partly because she used to brief very quickly. So they'd have a meeting or a COVID Cobra or something like that, and Nicola Sturgeon would sort of immediately do their her press conferences, or they'd let things be known before the Westminster end of the operation had sort of got out of bed, and it used to drive them around the twist. Oh my God, silence on Newscast.
Because I wanted to move the dial.
Oh, good.
And I want to talk about the Conservative Party in crisis.
Yes.
And the article from Suella Braverman in my Sunday Telegraph, who has managed to nutcracker Rishi Sunak by blaming him before the election. She's now blaming him after the election and clearly launching or relaunching her leadership bid. So where do you two experts think this leaves the leadership? And before you answer, can I tell you the bit of gossip I loved in the papers today?
What was that?
In the Sunday Times, Rishi Sunak will stay till the end of July and James Cleverly will be a caretaker leader whilst the contest goes on, with a meeting on Monday to discuss the rules and duration of the contest. That was new gossip, I thought.
Well, Laura and I were both standing in Downing Street when Rishi Sunak made his last speech as Prime Minister, and he said he would remain as Conservative Party leader until the process for selecting his successor is in place. I think at first blush that sounded to some people like he was saying he would stay until his successor was in place, but it was not that
what he
at
said
all.
at all.
It was a holding position to allow the Conservative Party, basically people who are not Rishi Sunak, to work out how long they want that contest to be, and then I think he will make a call. So basically, if you think about what's going to happen in Parliament before the summer, Rishi Sunak, I think, is clearly going to stay on until the summer. If he does, that means an awkward, embarrassing moment as leader of the opposition on Tuesday when the new speaker is elected. It means responding to the King's speech, and it means one Prime Minister's questions as leader of the opposition, and then he can ride off to the backbenches. That's not that embarrassing. But if he stays longer, then it's a lot of Prime Minister's questions. It's responding to a budget, which the Leader of the Opposition has to do. I can see why he wouldn't want to stomach that. But I do feel like the Conservative Party is inching towards a long contest.
I think there's no doubt about that.
Robert Jenrick on Laura's programme said that he would like that.
He did, and Michael Howard, also former leader and now in the House of Lords, he said that too. So
that's what he did.
He said it should be a long contest, and that is clearly, seems to me, that's where the sentiment is going. And this debate, though, about how long Sunak stays on is very up and running. So someone who was in the cabinet until 5 minutes ago, until Thursday night or until Friday morning, whenever it happened, said to me yesterday, look, if you can do 2 PM queues, why can't you do 9? Actually, this instability of just having a change and then another change, it would just get messy.
But do you both think there's a version where he goes at the end of July?
I think there is a version
Yes.
where he goes at the end of July. There's a suggestion maybe that even that Ian Duncan-Smith might step in as some kind of caretaker. I think that's probably more likely than... So someone like James Cleverly, I don't think that he has necessarily decided if he's going to run, but I can't see the appeal for somebody who sees himself possibly as one of the candidates of stepping in as some kind
Oh, it
of
would
caretaker.
have to be someone who isn't a candidate.
Yeah, so Ian Duncan-Smith has been talked about possibly. Someone said to me yesterday, it seems a good idea to me, but I'm not sure if anyone's actually asked him. So we'll see. But it's messy, though. It's very, very messy.
I'm going to supply a name now.
Go on, then.
Based on no contacts in Westminster, no knowledge. But I'm just listening.
It hasn't stopped lots of people.
No, but
I think you've got a lot more knowledge than you betray, Mr. O'Connell.
Well, Jeremy Hunt.
He said no.
No, I'm talking caretaker. Jeremy Hunt as caretaker. He's a clean player because he's said, I don't want it.
Well, that's
I do think he is, to everyone's shock, including his, suddenly a huge player in the debate over the future of the Conservative Party.
No doubt.
Even though he's not going to be a leadership candidate for the third time. I think suddenly the man who resisted the yellow tide in the home counties and Surrey and that sort of belt around London has a lot to say to the Conservative Party about how he did it. So I think that will count for a lot. I should also say, I think a lot of these questions will begin to get settled next week, not just because they'll all be back together in Parliament, but also because on Tuesday, the new Parliament will assemble for the formalities of electing a Speaker and being sworn in. And I just think there's no substitute for the Conservative MPs sitting together on the other side of the House of Commons to where almost all of them have ever sat, looking around and going, oh, God, there's barely any of us.
Well,
and no one cares what we have to say.
On that, 15% of 100 is 15. And 15% of 121 is under 20. And aren't the rules to trigger...
18 Tory MPs
could trigger a leadership under the current rules.
Oh, my God. Well, look, at the moment, the people who are going to run aren't even saying publicly that they're going to run. So this morning, both Robert Jenrick and Victoria Atkins wanted to come on the programme. Robert Jenrick is definitely going to run. There is no doubt about that, unless something really, really weird happens. Victoria Atkins, we know, wants to run, even though she didn't want to say it. And they were both very sort of almost hilariously coy this morning, because our viewers, everybody watching and listening, is thinking, what's the reason for somebody to come out on the Sunday after? And fair play to them both for coming forward and having the guts to come out and talk about getting an absolute battering at the polls. But they were both very, very coy and not wanting to admit that they were interested in the job. Here they are.
I honestly don't think that 3 days on from a general election in which we've just lost so many of our friends and colleagues, that it is right to have self-indulgent conversations like this.
The reason I came on today was genuinely not to talk about leadership, because this is not the moment for this. We need to show the public that we understand they have sent us some very, very loud messages.
I mean, they were both coy about why they were there, but I thought there was one big difference. Robert Jenrick has an argument for why the Conservative Party lost and what someone, whoever that might be, could do as leader. Victoria Atkins, I have to say, I mean, she was Health Secretary, it's a senior position, but she's not the most obvious leadership contender. She hasn't been visibly running for ages like Robert Jenrick has. You're going to break from the back of the pack like David Cameron did in 2005. You've got to have an argument. And if she has one, she went absolutely no distance towards articulating one. And I do think Conservative MPs, some of whom have had senior positions, are going to have to learn quite fast that when you're one member of a quite small party, in fact, literally smaller than it's ever been before, you don't get a natural right to have 15 minutes of broadcast real estate if you've got nothing to say.
Well, it was interesting as well. I wondered what it must feel like if you're used to going on to any programme or doing any interview, and you're used to being the health secretary, and someone's going to talk to you for kind of 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, and then actually you're suddenly just in a world where you've got 6 minutes to make your pitch. And I'm also not quite clear what the argument she was trying to make. She did the kind of thing, voters have lost trust. We have to think about our values and integrity. She didn't have a clear, obvious analysis of what had gone wrong. Robert Jenrick, on the other hand, has been offering that analysis since he quit in December. And a cynic might raise an eyebrow and think, well, perhaps when he quit and he started making this argument about failures on immigration, perhaps, just perhaps, he had in mind the idea that he might quite fancy a tilt at the job, which might be available before too long. And his campaign, I think, clearly has been up and running for some time. And I don't know if this week we'll get actually official declarations. I'm not sure.
Well, one thing that will interest me is the line-up in the Commons, watching the new... Everyone sit on the different side. There isn't enough space, is there, to put all the government MPs on the government benches, so you're going to have Labour MPs sitting on the other side, I understand. And then we will see who is sitting next to Rishi Sunak. Obviously, I've already hinted with my scoop that Jeremy Hunt will be sitting next to him. But inevitably, do you think we'll get a clue by seeing who sits on the front bench with him? Will that be an important sign?
I don't know. I think as things stand, I think they'll keep the teams sort of as they are. Obviously, there are going to be lots of gaps because people lost their seats, so they're going to have to come up with some new shadows.
Well, I was looking at John Major's shadow cabinet of 1997.
You
cool dude
know
that I
how
am
to have
the
a
other
good
day.
time.
And basically, John Major ended up as leader of the opposition, shadow foreign secretary, shadow defence secretary, and so you know it's visibly humiliating. But they did that leadership election very quickly. And Rishi Sunak, by the way, did appoint a new shadow chief whip. Stuart Andrew.
Yes, he did.
In the weekend. I'm sure we all noticed that.
Although there isn't yet a shadow defence secretary or a shadow education secretary, because there are actually getting bums on seats in the House of Commons is really important. You know, when Bridget Phillipson stands up and says, aha, I'm going to bring in VAT, I'm going to remove the VAT exemption from schools, who's going to be the person who stands up opposite her? You know, Jeremy Hunt, as things stand, is the Shadow Chancellor. But is he going to stay in that? So it will all look very different.
And also, even once they do have a leader, whenever that is, it is going to be hard for them to form a functioning opposition, just numerically. Labour really struggled at times in the last 5 years with far more MPs than the Conservative Party now has. They basically had everyone on the front bench who was willing to serve or who they were willing to have serve on the front bench. That's it. And when they had a load of resignations over Gaza several months ago, they ended up filling the vacancies, in some cases, with members of the House of Lords. The Conservatives are going to really struggle just to shadow every member of the government, to fill select committees, though they'll have far fewer select committee chairmanships. They're going to struggle for money, because public money, short money, for opposition parties is a function of how many seats you have. I don't think they've yet grasped the mechanics of how difficult it's going to be for them to be in opposition.
Do you know the other thing they're going to struggle for, which might be the most painful thing of all? Relevance. They're going to really struggle to feel relevant, and politicians are going to have a really hard time with that.
Well, you just look at the map, and it's been very interesting. I think the papers have had a great Sunday. There's been some really fabulous editions and playfulness, actually, there's Keir Starmer produced in the style of the Jonathan Yeo portrait of King Charles.
The genius that is Morton Morland.
Right, that's the Sunday Times.
Yeah.
So we pay tribute to the Sunday journalism, which is outside this building. I hope that sounds genuine and not smug. And then, well, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, for me, just to open my mouth. But I think there's been a lot of amazing work. And one of the things, when you look at the map, is, of course, there isn't a Tory north of Hadrian's Wall.
Or in Wales.
And there isn't a Tory in Oxfordshire.
Well, that's really, really, really incredible. There's also somebody had some fun in one of the papers this morning about the different walking routes you could go without going through a Tory constituency. So people have been very creative in lots of their weekend journalism.
Talking of creative, we are limping off now, but we have found one of us has managed a very good rendition of Arthur, the election theme tune, on the piano.
Oh, yes.
And we can look and listen to it.
Well, your piano playing was marvellous, and I think that can give us an excellent finale, more than enough from us. So goodbye.
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 Newscast from the BBC.